Well, I'm excited to talk about research and see if I can get you excited about the kinds of things that we are doing. So, Professor Krishnamurthy wanted me to talk about what open source means for research. And I'll try to explain to you a little bit about some things that we do, and from there try to explain to you why open source is important. Okay? So this is work that I did with a whole bunch of people over multiple years and many papers. Okay? And what we do is we analyze social media. Okay? And the idea is that I want to figure out, for example, relationships between people. Why is that important? Well, maybe I want to also find out, for example, if a rumor is going on, or if something called astroturfing is happening. Do you know what astroturfing is? So it's when people kind of claim that they come from a big group and there's this big effort to do something. It turns out it's just one guy with a lot of money. It just looks like there are multiple users, but it's actually not really the case. So there are many interesting things that are happening, and it is important now because sometimes something becomes like a small rumor on Twitter, but eventually it's just snowballs so much that it becomes the evening news. Okay? And sometimes we make our own reality of what goes on social media. So it has become an interesting thing to analyze social media and to find out how information travels, what things are credible, what are relationships between people, and in fact, sociologists are really studying it as what our society has become. So we are trying to develop tools that help us understand what we can from things like Twitter. Even though it is short messages, you find that there's a lot of interesting things you can do. So to analyze it, okay, one of the things we do is we analyze people's actions. So, what are people's actions? Well, it depends on what you use. Okay? I don't use Facebook because that's people's private space, but I look at Twitter because it's what people do in public. What people do is they send messages to each other, they forward messages, and sometimes they direct it to someone, or sometimes they broadcast it. So, do all of these mean interesting things? Well, I don't know. So what I can do is I can analyze. So the kinds of things we do is we basically say that people's relationship really impacts how they talk to each other. So you will talk differently to your close friend than to your professor. Or we used to think that was the case, but maybe it's not anymore. Or that you will talk differently to your close friend than to your enemy, okay, or your professor. So in fact, they talk about that in sociology. They actually have names for these things. It turns out that there are different kinds of relationships you have, and some people call that embedded is your friendship. They are there for social support and social functions. And there are still people who are, they call it arm's length. They are there for information, to provide you useful services. You know, they give you some value, so you maintain a relationship for them, but you kind of behave differently, right? So if somebody's your close friend, you spend a lot of time with them, so that actually enforces that you actually have a close relationship. You have to invest time so that it becomes so, okay? So this is what we do. We basically try to find ways of analyzing these. So, for example, you can look at the kinds of words you use. This is not our work. There's actually a package called linguistic inquiry that analyzes kind of the types of words you use and then how many times you use them. And that kind of understands, it's a way of understanding your relationship. So these are the kinds of, you know, do you talk about money and religion and death? Or do you talk about achievements or your home life or, you know, your dog, your cat? That's mostly what we talk about on the internet anyway. But these tell something about our relationships, right? You don't often go and talk about your cat to your professor. That hasn't happened to me. So our question was, well, what if I didn't actually look at the text itself and looked at how you behave between people, can I really understand something about the kind of text you use, right? So I will not bore you with all the things, but we basically started to look at these different kinds of behavior, and we developed features to analyze them. So we look at your behavior being balanced, whether you pay attention, whether your attention is symmetric or asymmetric, whereas what is the time priority in your life. So if 5 of your friends send you a message, which one do you reply first to? And which ones do you delay more, right? So there is a pecking order in our relationships, we just don't even know it, but it is true. And let's say that I take all of this behavior, and I also look at the kinds of stuff that you do. For example, how many friends and followers you have. The point is that lots of people have lots of friends and followers. That doesn't really tell me enough. I have to see what you actually do with them. So let's look all of these, and let's try to see if I can look at all of these features, can I understand the types of relationships you have? Okay. So we had lots of features such as these. We developed code for over years. And we did interesting things like we found out that looks pretty ugly now. That's kind of sad. That you can cluster them. If you look at the kind of behavior, your behavior actually falls in kind of these 2 main clusters. And those 2 clusters are the same as if you were to cluster behavior or text. So the point is that, looking at just the behavior features, I can actually say something about the kind of relationship you have. It turned out that they were exactly these 2 classes I talked about. One was a friendship, remember? The other one was kind of more information and some use to you, I keep you around kind of relationship. So these features were very useful for finding that. And I'm not the only person who has done this. There's lots and lots of research where people are developing new features to find out different things about people or the text or how rumors will propagate. All these different kinds of features are becoming a feature in all the papers. And we did other things. We looked at, by looking at how you behave, can I find out something about your personality? Okay? So, personality is measured in 5 different dimensions. There's different ways to measure it, but this big 5 actually has these 5 dimensions. We have a score for each one. And we actually had people take tests who were real Twitter users, and then we looked at their behavior, we analyzed them, and then we did the same thing. We looked at the text and see how I can predict based on text. And then we looked at other types of behavior. So the top two groups were the stuff that people had studied, but we added a whole bunch of behavioral things. And then what we found was that you can see what kinds of behavior is indicative of which features, and you can see that you can do as well as with behavior as you would do with text. Okay, so you find some interesting things by just analyzing how people behave, and we publish results, and other people publish results. So now trying to come to why we would like to do things in open source. The thing is that when I publish results and somebody else does, how do I know what they compute is similar to what I compute, or is it the same or different? And lots of people from, let's say, social sciences would like to use some of our features, but it is not something that's easy to show them if it is not in a good and easy to use package. And I want them to be able to analyze and say that, look, you've done it this way, but I actually normalize it in a different way. I want them to write modules so they can actually import it and export it to the data types that they use. So not only that it is important so I can compare results, but also our research will have more impact if more people will use our features and learn them and say, okay, this is the RPI feature X, Y, and Z, but we tried it here and it didn't work. Well, that still is press. But you learned something. So it is becoming very important in research to start to standardize things. And to be able to standardize things, what you need is as much openness as possible. And this is where I think open source is a big, important step. We need to have things that are open source, that are compatible with other open source projects, and things that everybody will contribute to and use. You will see that this kind of study is done even just in computer science in many different fields. And each field will publish in a different conference, and everybody will use a different formula. Okay? If we do that, we are never going to really get anywhere interesting. The formula is not so interesting. What it is our understanding. So we need to look at things and start to standardize as much as possible. So we as computer scientists can really help, because we can also help other disciplines to do things with very large data, collect data in a standardized way, because lots of systems will actually have limitations in how many calls you can make per hour, right? They will have limitations on what you can do with data. When you're talking about gigabytes and terabytes of data, it is not trivial how to process that. So you have to write code that works correctly for very large data and doesn't require you to buy a supercomputer all the time, right? This is ultimately what we are all working for as computer scientists, right? To make it cheaper. So we want to basically have standardized ways of doing it and make it computable for everybody so that it can actually run, okay? And I was having this discussion just today where, most of us think sorting as something you do in memory, right? But this is no longer true for the kind of data we have. Plus, the data we have is not just files, it is graphs. Well, we have to do things efficiently for graphs. Well, there are lots of libraries actually that do that well, but we need to be compatible with those. So this is where open source is very important. We need to standardize, use standard things, and make it available to the community so that the community can do research faster, and that we can actually be part of what they do. So, with that, I will tell you that we have started putting our code online on GitHub. But right now it's just a combination of files that my student Sujoy, right there, raise your hand, all right, has been given the duty of making this usable. Now what we are looking for is people who are willing to help us to build this into a nice module that everybody can use, and that our research can have more impact, but you guys can also participate in the research we do, and you will see that we can find many interesting things using this code. But in general, in all research areas, you are hearing more and more about open source, because the problem is that we need to make sure when people publish something, that another group first doesn't have to do it from scratch if they want to check what you have done. Two, other people should be able to check what you've done is actually true, that you are not making things up. So that's what open source gives us, that the ability to have standard ways of doing and checking things, and hopefully doing fun things with less effort. That is all.